11:30 or at 11:30. We're glad that you're connected with us and not your device. We'll help you sort through all that stuff you saw through the day. And no doubt it was a hectic day, and it's going to be a hectic year ahead. 1 year ago today, President Trump was sworn in for his second term, and it was probably about as cold as it is today as well. I was in Washington, and they moved the inauguration inside. But from threats to the takeover of Greenland to considering the Insurrection Act in Minnesota, we're diving into all of that with Troy Mayor Ethan Baker and State Representative Noah Arbury. And former U.S. Attorney Matthew Schneider gives us a breakdown of that rarely used act. And speaking of the president, his administration has another idea that could help homeowners. Remax of Southeastern Michigan president, another Schneider, Jeanette Schneider, breaking down the idea that involves your 401k. Could you use that to put a down payment on a house? We'll tell you what the president is talking about. But we begin at the White House, where President Trump does mark that 1 year of his second term. And he spent nearly 2 hours of it in the briefing room of the White House. Much of it was spent touting what he sees as his administration's accomplishments and doubling down on the country's need to control Greenland. He reiterated his claims for national security and financial security. And when a reporter asked how far he was willing to go to make that happen, he said, quote, "You'll find out." The idea of the U.S. controlling Greenland isn't popular with people who live on the island, and a reporter asked him about that as well.
I think that we will work something out where NATO is going to be very happy and where we're going to be very happy. But we need it for security purposes. We need it for national security and even world security. It's very important. How about it?
You said you're confident something's going to get worked out in Greenland, but Greenlanders have made it clear they don't want to be part of the U.S.
Well,
what gives the U.S. the right to take away that self-determination?
When I speak to them, I'm sure they'll be thrilled.
President Trump is speaking to global elites and billionaires at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland tomorrow. The Greenland issue is no doubt expected to dominate the conversation there. Stay tuned to The Pulse for all of it. There's a lot of political news to catch you up on, so let's pick up the pace and run through some of the other big stories in the world of politics right now. The Justice Department acknowledging members of Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency might have misused Social Security data. According to Politico, 2 members were in touch with an advocacy group trying to overturn election results in certain states. And one of them signed an agreement that might have involved using data to match state voter rolls. DOJ officials say the Social Security Administration referred both employees to see if they violated the Hatch Act. You may remember the Hatch Act is the act that bans government employees from using their positions for political gain or purposes. It's not clear if any data was actually shared. The White House and SSA haven't commented tonight. To the Supreme Court, where justices will hear arguments over President Trump's effort to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. He claims she committed mortgage fraud. Cook denies that. Critics say the president wants to control U.S. interest rate policy. The Fed is designed as an independent body, though. No president has fired a sitting Fed governor in the history of all of this. Economists warn a politicized Fed will damage its credibility and lead investors to demand higher rates before investing in U.S. treasuries. And Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance announcing they're expecting a son. Their 4th child is due late July. The social media post from the family says they both are doing well and thank the military doctors for taking excellent care of their family. To Minnesota now, where protests do continue over President Trump's immigration crackdown and an ICE officer shooting and killing Renee Good as she drove off. The president hasn't ruled out using the Insurrection Act to quell protests, something that hasn't been done since 1992, when President George H.W. Bush used that to end unrest in Los Angeles. That came after 4 white police officers were acquitted in the beating of Rodney King. Joining us now live via Zoom to talk about what the Insurrection Act is and how it works, former U.S. Attorney Matthew Schneider, and a regular here on The Pulse. And Matthew, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us here tonight.
Thank you, Roop. Great to be back.
So let's talk about it. Like, first of all, just from a definition point of view, the Insurrection Act, what exactly is it and what does it do?
Well, to figure that out, you have to look at a different law, actually, the Posse Comitatus Act. That's really the law that is in play that says you cannot use the U.S. military to enforce domestic law. That's the baseline rule. The Insurrection Act is an exception to that rule, and it is a law that allows the president to use federal troops to enforce domestic laws in only certain circumstances. And it also gives the president a great amount of power to decide when those circumstances are, and it's an exception that could very well be playing out here in the near future.
Let me ask you this, Matthew, from an objective point of view, what's the point of the Posse Comitatus Act if you have the Insurrection Act in the back pocket of any president, Democrat or Republican?
Well, there's a reason why the Insurrection Act has only been used about 30 times in our country's history. It's rare, and presidents know it's rare. So it's been used mainly when governors have requested it, such as the LA riots. That's an exception. It's also been used in civil rights violations, such as in when the schools were being integrated. That's an exception. Now, what we're seeing here, there's been other uprisings in the United States. We've seen other domestic problems. We saw that right after COVID. And presidents have not tried to use the Insurrection Act. It's not because they didn't have the authority to do that. It's just that they knew what a significant act that is to use federal troops on U.S. soil, basically against U.S. citizens.
You know, we talk about state sovereignty and how important that is. That's basically what federalism is all about, right? I mean, we have states that have their own rights and they have tools in their tool chest. And it seems as though right now the governor, Tim Walz, has tools in his tool chest, the National Guard, and the president has the tools in his tool chest, the Insurrection Act. And if the two meet up, we could be talking about a pretty tenuous situation.
Yes, we could. And no matter what happens, if there is an Insurrection Act that is invoked by the president, there'll definitely be litigation about that. I'm sure Tim Walz will be one of the people who sues. The states will be suing. People who might be injured by this, and I mean affected by this, might be suing. Or if you're a protester and somehow you're harmed by a federal troop, or somehow you're caught in the crossfire, you could then find yourself as a potential plaintiff. So it's one of the things that the Trump administration, I'm sure, is thinking about. It's not like no one's going to sue over this. Everybody will be upset. And so they have to determine whether or not they want to put up with that as well.
You know, we talk a lot about guardrails, and certainly whether there's a Democrat or Republican in office trying something that attorneys generals and secretaries of state don't like in different ways, federal judges, they can step up. And so when we talk about delays because of a lawsuit, would that take enough time so that perhaps this particular uprising, so to speak, in Minnesota would already be gone by the time they adjudicate it?
Well, if we just look at recent history, we've seen a lot of these cases move at lightning speed. Just look at the Supreme Court. They've turned out to basically be a rocket docket for these swift-moving cases. And so a party can seek an injunction. That means they want immediate relief to freeze a law. And so that's what would happen here. It's not going to be the long playing out. It would be people seeking and demanding in court, I want to be heard right now. And the courts do have a timeline for that to accommodate it. So I think it would actually move along quite quickly.
And finally, from a legal point of view, talk for a moment about the conditions that would have to be ripe for.
Could be. And the Insurrection Act does provide that certain things have to take place. Number one, in order to invoke this act, the president has to make a proclamation that there is an emergency and that there is a circumstance that makes this necessary. Only after he makes this proclamation and he tells people who are in the affected areas to go home, it literally says that they have to retreat to their places of abode in this old language. The president has to actually say that first to invoke the Insurrection Act. So we can see that. If we see that, if the president puts out a proclamation directing the people in Minnesota to go home, then that's the first step in invoking the Insurrection Act. And we should all be on the watch if he does do that.
Well, you put everyone
and how that looks and what people are really feeling in our community. There's no question people on, all across the spectrum politically are feeling the fear of potentially what could happen.
You think there are Republicans who
I do. I think there are Republicans. They're not going to be as vocal about it. But sure, there are people who don't necessarily understand what the president's doing. I'm still hopeful that there is some master plan here and strategy going on to bring the countries together. President's in Davos tomorrow. He's speaking with world leaders. He's speaking to the world leaders, among others. I'm hoping that there's some conversation that's going to come from that will then spin things back and get us in a place where it makes a little bit more sense. And I remain hopeful of that.
What is that place that makes more sense to you, Noah Arbit, Representative?
Hands off Greenland. I mean, the United Mark that we can use the Danish territory of Greenland for military purposes And if there's any other purposes that the United States needs to, exploit Greenland for, whether it's, the minerals, like we can make that agreement with the Kingdom of Denmark. But the president seems to have this preoccupation with expanding the map, and it seems to be all about his legacy and his, pretensions to history as to being a president who expanded the map. There's nothing that the Kingdom of Denmark can do to negotiate with a madman.
Could this be?
I don't think this is about just expanding the map. I do think there are legitimate national security interests.
We have an agreement with the Kingdom of Denmark. And there's nothing more that needs to happen.
There's
no change of status that is dictating the reason why this president has been so bellicose.
There's
right?
no change of status.
He wrote to the Prime Minister of Norway.
There's no change of status that the three of us sitting here at this table necessarily know about. I do think there are issues facing with Russia and China, the Canadian government now.
No one is more happy about this than the Russians.
But if
divide in NATO, this is Vladimir Putin's happiest day.
Hold on. If Russia ends up having an interest in Greenland, and the United States is saying, we're aware of that, and we want to do something to protect the United States.
Then why
is that okay?
Why did the president hold up funding for Ukraine? If the president cares about, forestalling Russian aggression, he needs to be funding Ukraine and our defense of Ukraine instead of tearing NATO, the most successful military alliance in history, apart. It's Vladimir Putin's happy day.
Mayor Ethan Baker, could this be one of those things where President Trump is overextending his ambition in order to try to broker some kind of a deal?
Consistently, that's what he does. I'm hopeful that, again, that is what he's doing.
So what would that deal kind of look like to you?
There's clearly, he's taken issue with NATO. He's taken issue with what the European Union, what every country is not doing their fair share, as he likes to talk about it. I think there's something related to that. I think it also has to relate with China and Russia. And now we see Prime Minister Carney in Canada, taking big steps against the United States, essentially. It is a threat. I understand your passion. I understand your fear. I also understand that there are big issues here that we all have to, we can't get stuck with the talking points and get stuck with the back and forth.
This isn't about talking points.
No, but it is.
It's about the United States changing its global face as to now being an enemy state of the people and of the states of the countries that have been our allies.
Do you believe
for 70 years?
Representative, you believe full-heartedly from your core that is the full intention here, and the president's not using this as a way to overextend ambition and then walk it back to do some kind of a negotiation?
Listen, the president is clearly mentally unwell. He wrote to the Prime Minister of Norway stating that the reason why he's taken an interest in Greenland is because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize.
Mayor Ethan Baker, there are plenty of Republicans out there who saw that and literally shook their head and said, that is ridiculous.
I agree. And I'm not a Republican who has ever, I've never stood by his conduct. It fascinates me in a terrible way at times, too. But
that is wrong, right? We can agree at this table. Hold on, no. We can agree
that it is wrong. I do think it's wrong to make light of the situations. I think it's wrong to share private text messages to try to prove a point. I think there are mistakes that the president makes that anybody makes in that situation. But he tends to have a consistency in doing things in the way that most people are not comfortable with.
What this is going to result in is the suicide of a superpower. We are now the global stupid power is really what we are. I mean, we are losing our allies. Do you understand what it would mean if we actually invaded Greenland and we lose our bases, our naval bases and our army bases in Europe? We will have no force protection in projection in Europe, in the Middle East, and Asia for people who care about Israel's security. We will not be able to protect Israel or deter any.
Listen, I understand. You're talking about the worst-case scenario. I want to ask you about the short-term worst-case scenario. When you're tariffing 8 nations that are critical to the U.S. economy, what does that do to the U.S. dollar? What are you concerned about that?
Well, you saw what happened to the stock market today, and you see the bond market. It's going to be poorly affected, and I think that the president will respond in kind and realize that's a bad idea. He tends to do that. He puts out these big threats of tariffs, liberation day. He goes to them, and then he sees the reaction on the economic level, and he pulls back. I think that's
it's time for Congress to step in.
But this president has walked back a lot on things that he first boldly proposed and then walked back because he can't do everything that he says he wants to do.
Well, he went and got Maduro from Venezuela.
Yeah,
you have to wonder why European allies would not take this deadly seriously as they are now.
I want to talk about.
It's time for Congress to step in and invoke the 25th Amendment.
Another serious issue right now that's happening is in Minnesota.
Right, because the Congress is weak and ineffectual and in hoc to their leader.
No, it's such a close split in the Congress. Even so, if it was the other way around, the Democrats would.
We have a minute left. I want to talk about Minneapolis. What are your concerns about the sovereignty issues of the state sovereignty? When you have Governor Walz, whether you like the guy or not, basically saying, I got my National Guard troops here, and you got President Trump saying, hey, I may pull the Insurrection Act over here. That puts this country in a pretty precarious situation. Are you worried about that?
Absolutely. It's a tinderbox always when you start pitting military companies against each other, essentially, from the state or the federal level. I don't think the president's going to use the Insurrection Act. I saw your previous guest talk about what would likely happen before that. I think that's great information.
30 seconds
I think
left,
you have to laugh when you have a president who's trying to incite a civil war, a world war, and claims that he should be eligible for the Nobel Peace Prize, right? I mean, this is really what we're looking at. I mean, this is an intensely febrile moment, and the president, every time he is faced with opposition or, to a decision that he makes, he pours gasoline on the flames and makes the situation worse.
From Minneapolis.
The most irresponsible person to be in charge of the United States.
It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show, The Pulse. Here to talk about the Trump administration's plan to allow investors to use their retirement funds for a housing down payment. RE/MAX's Southeastern Michigan president, Jeanette Schneider, and it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us here.
Good to see you, too.
Now, I guess anyone can kind of dip into their 401k with penalty.
Correct.
And use their money for anything they want. But President Trump is saying what this time?
He is proposing that folks would be able to tap into their 401k and kind of loosely saying without penalties. Now, what that exactly looks like, we don't know. So we'd have to kind of see the devil's going to be in the details. But it is, something that he's throwing out there as another tool in the toolkit to help with home affordability.
So what does that do? As the president of Southeast Michigan RE/MAX, you look at that and you say, what does that do in terms of opening doors and handing keys to new homeowners?
And we've talked about this over the last several weeks with some other proposals that have come out from the administration, and I think it clearly signals that they understand affordability is an issue, and it's an item that really means a lot to most Americans. Will this move the needle significantly? I kind of find myself saying the same thing I've said on other ones, is I don't know that it does, because some details behind the facts, only 54% of Americans have a retirement account.
Yeah.
So
Trump administration, it could be kind of more of a gimmick, because if you're talking about people who have 401ks, they may not be the ones who have to dip into it to get the house.
I think that you're hitting the nail on the head there, because realistically, the folks that have the 401ks and have the money, enough money in the 401k to do it, are probably at this point in their mid-30s and pretty much solidly in the middle income stratus. If you're trying to help younger potential homeowners and lower income potential homeowners, I'm not sure this is the tool that's going to really, impact them.
But the tool that could impact some things is President Trump saying investors who have bought large swaths of homes across America, stop doing that, and let's allow more fair pricing with these homes. That could be something that could actually help.
It could, and I think that like a lot of things that come out there, we have to kind of temper our excitement on these things, because anything that helps we'll gladly take. But the reality of it is, the large investor institution, that are here, we don't see that pretty much Metro Detroit wide. The city of Detroit probably sees a little bit more of that activity than many of the neighborhoods, and there would be some potential with some other homes coming on the market, more mom and pop investors. Being able to do that. But if you look nationwide at the numbers, it's roughly about 7% of homes are controlled by that. So again, even if all of that were to change, that's not significant enough inventory coming to market to really solve our
essentially, and hopefully for their own good, but also for the midterms.
Well, I think that's a big driving point, and I think that's why kind of this drumbeat and the pace that we're seeing of different things coming out, because there's been the 50-year mortgage, there's now the 401k, there's the institutional investors, there's Fannie and Freddie buying back 200 billion, and I mean, so they're throwing a lot of things at the wall. What sticks, because a lot, if not all of the things that have been proposed so far need congressional approval to some degree, and by and large, Congress doesn't get much done, and I don't see Congress necessarily lining up to help him get a win, so I'm not really sure where all of this lands.
Well, I mean, and if they